Number 10. Phoenix Saga. Although now we just look back at the Phoenix Saga as being a part of history, at the time it was shocking. Jean Grey merged with a cosmic force that saved her from dying in outer space, attracting the presence we have come to know as the Phoenix Force. This Phoenix Force would later be revealed to now be a part of Jean, granting her great power. She became known as having the power of a god and then turned dark and became an insane supervillain, and then she died. And she had been one of the founding members of the X-Men. This was big stuff. Of course, Jean wouldn't stay dead, which would end up only shocking readers even more in the future when she did return, especially as it meant that Cyclops would abandon his happy home life with Jean's clone, Madeline Pryor, who he had married and kinda also had a child with. Bad Scott Summers, bad Scott. Number 9. Death of Hulk. The difference between Jean's death during the Dark Phoenix Saga and that of Hulk's death during Civil War II is one felt at least like it was kinda coming from somewhere. We all knew that Bruce Banner at the time had been working to cure himself of his Hulk transformation. Amadeus Cho had ended up even trying to help his friend by trying to remove the gamma radiation from Bruce and take it into himself, turning him into the totally awesome Hulk, a more emotionally balanced version of the hero. Bruce Banner even gave Hawkeye a special Hulk-killing arrow in case he ever began to transform once more, and instructed that Hawkeye should kill him should that come to pass. However, we don't really learn about this until after Hawkeye has done the deed. Instead, a tense argument with Bruce is interrupted by his swift death. Of course, Bruce Banner and his Hulk would be back, but at the moment he died, readers were likely thinking, wait, did I just read that right? Did Bruce's companion and friend Clint Barton just kill him? And yes, he did. He did do that. Even he was shocked. Number 8. Nick Fury becomes a Watcher. Basically, the story here is that the villain known as Orb, working with a few other villains, was jealous of Uatu the Watcher and decided to shoot him and steal his eye so that he could have the power of a Watcher. However, when Nick Fury found out about this tragedy, he immediately went to investigate as he did not know who was behind the ordeal. The Watcher actually refused to tell Fury what he knew, as it was not really his role to do so, only to watch and observe, not to interfere, even when he himself had been interfered with. That is some respect right there. He's like, this is my job, that's it, even if I'm kind of bleeding and maybe dying. Because of this, Fury felt he had no choice and killed the Watcher and stole his other eye, which contained Uatu's memories, in order to try to figure out who was responsible for the previous theft and for attacking Uatu. Eventually, Fury managed to get the confession he sought and discovered the Orb was responsible. One of the other villains the Orb had been with at the time, Dr. Midas, returned to the Watcher's citadel in order to absorb even more power from Uatu's corpse. Fury overloaded him using the power of the eye that was in his possession. This resulted in an explosion that seemingly killed both Midas and Fury, but in the end it was discovered that Fury had survived. As punishment for his sins, because all of this took place in the original Sin story, the Watchers turned him into Uatu's replacement, forcing him to be the chained observer of Earth known as the Unseen. Number 7. Death of Wolverine. The death of an unkillable and one of the most popular heroes? This one caught a lot of people off guard initially, and likely helped to boost sales just from that title alone. Everyone wanted to know how Wolverine's story would end. Of course, once again, this is comics, so Wolverine's death would not end up being permanent. Because, yeah, he is one of the most popular characters, so obviously we're not gonna let him stay dead. In the end, it was adamantium that was Wolverine's undoing. The very thing that had made him so tough over the years also ended up killing him. Wolverine was without his healing factor after a microverse virus deactivated it, and learned that, well, there was also a bounty on his head. While other brilliant minds rushed to fix Wolverine's healing factor, Logan was resigned to his fate, not showing any desire for having it brought back. He tracked down the one responsible for the bounty on his head, and during the confrontation ended up rushing to save Weapon X test subjects and victims from having the deadly adamantium bonding process that he had actually gone through years before. Slashing the tanks of adamantium caused him to become covered in the liquid metal, which hardened and encased him, suffocating and killing him. What a way to go. But like I said, he would return. And with random burning hot claws to boot. Never forget that he has hot claws, though they never really come up. Number 6. Civil War. Not the second one though, that one was much less of a shock, I think. But the first Civil War got people excited while also amazing them when it first came out. Captain America and Iron Man had always kind of been at odds, but they were also friends and colleagues who had worked side by side for years as part of the Avengers. The notion that these two would be declaring all-out war on the other was pretty huge, especially when it came to the politics of what was going on, where Stark was advocating for his Superhuman Registration Act, or the Superhuman Registration Administration Act. Kinda became his later though. Which would demand more accountability for heroes and would basically make them all government agents. Iron Man believed this could help to prevent potential casualties during world-threatening situations and events. Cap, however, did not believe that superhumans needed to be restricted and stood for freedom of superhumans. In the end, Captain America looked at the damage the war had caused and decided to surrender, but was seemingly assassinated by a time-traveling bullet on his way to prison, which ends the war. I could explain more about the time-traveling bullet, but that would be a whole other video, really. Number 5. Death of the Ultimate Universe. So we all kinda saw this one coming, but it was still shocking. While the ultimate alternate universe of Earth 1610 was one that had a lot of weird problem areas, it also gave us a lot of great and inventive takes on characters and some really cool moments. So despite the fact that it had kind of been run into the ground, many fans were still left flabbergasted when the line was cancelled after years of existing and being considered relatively successful. Sure, we still gotta keep some of our favorite characters from 1610 like Miles Morales and the villainous Reed Richards known as the Maker, but it was still shocking to know that almost everything and everyone else from that universe was gone forever. Even heartbreaking for some. R.I.P. Ultimates. You live on in our dreams. Number 4. Spider-Woman revealed as Skrull Queen. Skrulls have been a known shape-shifting race in the comics since they were first introduced in Fantastic Four issue 2 in the 1960s, but that doesn't mean that their almost completely secret invasion of Earth didn't shock and surprise us. Secret Invasion was an event that made everyone question everything they knew. No one was to be trusted because you didn't know if who you were talking to or even thought you had known for years could secretly have been a Skrull. Needless to say, when it was finally revealed the Skrull Queen had actually been hiding disguised as accomplished Avenger and sometimes detective Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, people were shocked. Even more surprising was the fact that Norman Osborn, of all people, was the one to take her out. Number 3. Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn's ship. During the Sins Past story, it was revealed that Gwen Stacy had a secret and kinda creepy relationship with Norman Osborn. Ew. And that this relationship resulted in the birth of 2 twins. Osborn had sent Stacy to Paris to birth the 2 twins, and this all happened before, I believe, her relationship with Peter. After her death, the existence of her and Osborn's children remained unknown to Peter, but Osborn convinced the twins, whom he raised in secret, that Spider-Man was both their father and also responsible for their mother's death, turning them into his own minions and goblins. This whole story is pretty shocking and is very icky. Number 2. Captain America becomes Hydra Supreme. The Cosmic Cube became a sentient entity resembling a little girl known as Kobik. S.H.I.E.L.D. had hoped to use the shards that created her form to manipulate reality as they saw fit. Unfortunately, this plan did not work out for them. Red Skull managed to influence the girl into warping reality to turn Captain America into a long-time Hydra sleeper agent. And so we got the shocking story where it was revealed that all this time Cap had been working for the evil organization of Hydra. That one panel where Cap says "Hail Hydra"? Yeah, that was a real thing that happened. Cap would actually succeed in infiltrating and conquering the United States government, becoming the reigning Hydra Supreme, but would later be defeated by main continuity Captain America, who still lived within the Cosmic Cube. This version of Cap would return and defeat his alternate evil self. Whew. Thank goodness. Number 1. Miss Marvel's surprise pregnancy. I wish this was a shocking moment that I could forget, and yet I cannot. And I cannot also believe that someone greenlit this story. We learn in issue 197 of Avengers that Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel is pregnant. Not only that, but her pregnancy seems to be progressing along at an alarmingly quick rate. Carol is scared, but is reassured by Wanda, to whom she revealed her secret identity, that she is an Avenger, which means she has a group of friends who will stand by her no matter what. Unfortunately, what that ends up meaning is a group of friends who actually don't really seem to listen to her, celebrating the pregnancy and kind of shaming Carol somewhat for not being happier about it, despite the fact that Carol is terrified and has no earthly idea how this could have happened to her. It's later revealed that her baby, who grows up rapidly and introduces himself as Marcus, is also kind of the man who got her pregnant, or an extension of him anyways, who had to do so in order to use her body as a means of escaping limbo, but then realizes that his presence in the world is too dangerous. What a great plan you had. He ends up returning to limbo, but Carol for some reason decides to come with him so that he won't be alone. At no point do the Avengers really listen to Carol or check in with her or try to help her when she's obviously being manipulated by Marcus, who even confesses that he manipulated her to begin with. Thankfully, Chris Claremont at least wrote an Avengers annual a year later calling out how shockingly bad this story was. Thank you, Claremont. Number 10. Loki returns. Although Loki is a trickster that we all expect to return eventually, when he came back as a woman, many fans were shocked at his new form. Though mythologically speaking, Loki is known as an accomplished shapeshifter, and even in Marvel some of this is carried over. Still, the question remained of why this form? While Loki gave his own excuses, it was later revealed that he'd hijacked Sif's body to achieve his Lady Loki form, and would be forced later on to relinquish it. He would also die and return as Kid Loki, who had no knowledge of the villain his older self had been. And now, shockingly enough, but not if you're a fan of Norse mythos as I said, we have a version of Loki that can easily change between all of his forms at will. Pretty cool. Number 9. Wolverine defeats Hulk. Maybe not one of the most shocking moments per se, but definitely gave us a shocking panel. If you are wondering where one of the images on our thumb came from, that would be from Savage Wolverine number 5. Hulk and Wolverine have come to blows multiple times in the comics, but this is one of their most brutal fights, though not as brutal as their battle in Old Man Logan, in my opinion. During this story, Wolverine was attracted to Savage Land due to a device calling out to others to create chaos, so that an ancient monster from beneath the island could be released. Kind of a Cthulhu-looking space thing? Wolverine managed to get his wits about him, but was met there shortly after by an out-of-sorts Hulk. Wolverine figured the best way to take out Hulk was by pouncing on him and sending his adamantium claws clean through his brain. Alas, this didn't help that much, and the monster still escaped its prison, soaring off-world to meet more alien monsters out in space. Oh dear. Number 8. Hulk becomes immortal. We talked about Hulk's death by Hawkeye's arrow on part 1 of this list, but what we didn't talk about is how even after that shocking death, he just kept coming back. So many times in fact that it gave writer Al Ewing an idea. What if Hulk actually couldn't die? This concept allowed him to write a story which brought us back to the dark origins of Hulk, a man who would originally turn into a monster when the sun set. This was the original transformation story for Hulk, not based on emotions turning him into some sort of psychological horror, but based on old monster stories like that of Frankenstein, werewolves, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. When we got the immortal Hulk, this was how we were introduced to the big green hero slash monster, as an immortal being that when the sun sets, even when Banner had been killed, would rise again. Even though this concept was the original concept for the character, it was one we'd become so removed from that it shocked readers in a delightful way, reinventing the character they'd come to love by taking us back to his roots. Number 7. She-Hulk defends Star Fox. She-Hulk has always been a huge defender of superheroes. After all, she is one herself. But everyone was still caught somewhat off guard when she signed up to defend Star Fox, aka Eros, Thanos' brother. Eros had been an Avenger and a hero, but was being charged with assaulting and manipulating others using his pheromone powers of seduction. Some Avengers stood beside him, and some preferred to keep their names out of the headlines, while others still denounced him. But She-Hulk decided to defend him in court. What was more shocking to Jennifer was when she discovered that although he had not manipulated her into sleeping with him, Star Fox had manipulated her and John Jonah Jameson, aka Man-Wolf, into marrying one another, believing it was best for both of them. Still, She-Hulk would be forced to defend him in a more cosmic court of law later on, and would of course move to divorce Man-Wolf, believing their relationship to be a complete sham. Which kinda sounds like it was? Seemed like they were about to break up when he made them fall in love with each other. Number 6. Doctor Doom becomes Iron Man. Following the events of Doom's battle world, Doom realized that not even becoming a god had made him feel any sense of accomplishment. Feeling empty inside, Doom reflected perhaps it was his approach that had always been off, and decided to set off on a path of redemption, attempting to become one of the good guys. As a symbol of turning over a new leaf, he shed his armor and became an ally of Tony Stark, a man he'd always secretly admired. When Tony was left in a coma following the events of the Second Civil War, Doom surprised readers, shocking all of us Doom fans in a good way by becoming infamous Iron Man. As Iron Man, Doom was a force to be reckoned with, and one all villains seemed terrified of, and for good reason. Having Doom as a rival villain was hard enough, but having him as a hero meant that they would need to come together just to defend themselves against his might. And even then, these villains failed. Doom single-handedly took them out during a meeting where they'd all gathered to discuss the problem of Doom himself. Number 5. Death of Spider-Man. I'm not sure what was more shocking, when Spider-Man died the first time in Ultimates and had to immediately be resurrected because the timing had not been properly communicated, or when he died the second time with all the grandiose surrounding his death. The Ultimate Universe of 1610 was full of shocking moments, Spider-Man's death among them. In reality, the creatives wanted Spider-Man dead because they felt he was too similar to his 616 counterpart, and they were trying to get rid of all the characters who they felt were just too similar to the main continuity versions. Still, the death of Spider-Man made for a shocking title, even if it was in an alternate universe, as Peter Parker's Spider-Man was still considered the darling of Marvel, no matter which reality you're talking about. Number 4. Black Widow betrays Iron Man. Another Ultimate story that shocked many fans was the whole relationship and then subsequent betrayal between fellow Avengers Iron Man and Black Widow. On Earth 1610, these two were about to get married when Black Widow revealed her true colors. In this reality, she was a double agent and killed Jarvis before Tony could even stop her. Fortunately, he still had override systems in place on the nanobots he'd given Natasha, which helped her to control the armor he'd gifted her as an engagement gift. He used these nanobots to knock Natasha out, and when she came to the hospital, Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, arrived to take her out with an arrow to the head. In betraying her teammate, she'd also gotten Clint's family, which he had in Ultimates, killed, so he was out for revenge on multiple levels. Number 3. Iron Man, evil all along. Dun dun dun. The Crossing was a super out there storyline, one where it was revealed that Tony Stark had actually been a sleeper agent all along for Kang the Conqueror, who we later learned wasn't even really Kang but was a Mortis in disguise. Oh, comics. Tony went around being a huge villain for a while until he lay dying, inspired by his younger self to reform before he passed away. His younger self had been brought to the present by the Avengers to stop their version of Tony. Yeah, it was a time. I hope the Avengers learned that bringing a younger, less experienced Tony to defeat an older version who is a more accomplished genius is not really the best way to go in this scenario. Number 2. Thor gets hella pregnant. When did this happen? You guessed it, in the Ultimate Universe. Should just call this top 10 Marvel shocking moments of the Ultimate Universe. In the Ultimate Universe, however, Thor and Hela do not appear to be related, so at least there is that. But still, this is a shocking story for those who just happened to pick up a comic off the rack at the time. What happened was Thor wanted to leave Valhalla. In order to do so, he had to give Hela an heir, which was a term he agreed to. Yikes. Number 1. Return of Bucky Barnes. Bucky Barnes was one of the exceptions when it came to comic book character deaths. With most characters, there is always the expectation that the day will come where they will inevitably return, no matter how finite their death may have seemed or how many times the character has seemingly perished. However, Bucky's death was one of the few that was accepted as permanent. In truth, it had happened because Marvel wanted to move away from the idea of child sidekicks. Stan Lee especially was not a fan of that concept. In fact, you'll notice a good many of Marvel's heroes have been without kid sidekicks throughout Marvel history because of this. In 2005, Ed Brubaker made comic book history when he gave us the story of the Winter Soldier, resurrecting Bucky as a brainwashed assassin, bringing back one of the few characters who we expected to stay dead for good, alongside Marvel's Uncle Ben. But don't worry, Ed Brubaker did not bring back Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben's still pretty dead. What's more, Brubaker created an ending that could easily allow us to keep Winter Soldier or discard him based on how fans received this story. For Brubaker, the reasoning as well was that if Cap could have come back, then why couldn't Bucky? Also, we never saw him die on panel, so. Fortunately, this story that he told, while shocking, was well received, and so Bucky Barnes as the Winter Soldier returned for good. Woohoo! Number 10. MJ is killed! Peter gets a hook hand. One of the most shocking series around is JJ and his son Henry Abrams' Spider-Man miniseries from 2019. Well, it started in 2019. It is only 5 issues long, but has been delayed longer than I even thought possible for a series like this. Number 4 is finally set to come out September 23rd, and 5 has been pushed from its original release of January 2020 to November of 2020. Yikes, that's a huge delay. This series starts off with a bang and is filled with tons of interesting shocks. Mary Jane dies pretty much right off the bat, killed by the villain we later come to know as Cadaverous, and causing Peter Parker to retire and abandon their son Ben, leaving him in Aunt May's care. Which is pretty crazy because Aunt May was already pretty old when Spider-Man started, so yeah. And when Peter Parker does return, he's got a moody look, a beard, and a hook hand. That is some kind of something. Peter with the hook for a hand in a world where we have super advanced prosthetics and where he's friends with genius level heroes like Tony Stark and Reed Richards and, you know, is a genius himself. And I thought I'd seen everything. Number 9. Mutant Massacre. This shocking crossover event actually was so startling and well received that it effectively worked to help boost comic sales for the series involved. It follows the story of the mysterious villainous group of mutants known as the Marauders, who we'd later learn were working for the evil Mr. Sinister, as they attempt to murder the entire mutant community known as the Morlocks, many of whom have grotesque physical mutations which cause them to be rejected by society, a group whom Futurama likely took its inspiration from when it comes to their own sewer mutants. The Marauders succeed in their mission, killing hundreds of Morlocks during this gloomy attack, which would later be referred to as the Mutant Massacre. This story also featured a particularly shocking moment when the X Factor come face to face with the Marauders, who crucify the mutant Angel. Yikes. Number 8. Lizard eats his own son. A reformed Dr. Curt Connors would find himself becoming the Lizard once more. In the story Shed, the Lizard finally managed to kill Connors' consciousness, taking on a new mantle, Shed, and causing Connors to no longer be able to fight back against those animal instincts. Now, how did he do this? Well, by eating Kurt's son, Billy. That's right, Curt Connors as the Lizard basically ate his own son in a comic. Spider-Man at the time had been racing towards the Doctor in an attempt to stop him, but arrived too late. Fortunately, Spider-Man at least was able to reclaim some of Connors' humanity by showing him pictures of his son and forcing him to remember and face what he had done. Number 7. Wolverine loses his adamantium. There have been quite a few shocking moments that have come to us from 90s comics, but one of the most dramatic and also the weirdest thereafter was when Magneto stripped all the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, pulling it out of his body. This was insanely painful for Wolverine, but he managed to survive the forced debonding process. However, it left him somewhat changed, and he almost died during the process. Wolverine became more animalistic and also lost his nose for some reason. Wolverine would remain without his adamantium and sort of without his nose for almost 8 years, which is also pretty crazy to think about, especially when it's considered such an iconic part of Wolverine's power set. Not his nose, his adamantium. Although he does have superhuman senses, so I guess his nose is part of his power set. Oh my goodness. Number 6. Kingpin learns of Daredevil's secret identity. This was an especially shocking story arc. Known as Born Again, in this story, Daredevil's secret identity is sold out by his ex-girlfriend Karen Page, who had become a heroin addict and, while desperate, sold his true identity for a hit. This information got passed around and eventually made its way back to Kingpin. It's never good when your arch-nemesis finds out your secret civilian identity, but for Matt Murdock, this was one of the worst things that would ever happen to him. Kingpin uses information to destroy Daredevil's life on pretty much every level, taking his money and his home, and even using it to destroy his relationship with his current girlfriend, and even destroy his costume. Geez, guy had nothing left. Eventually, Wilson Fisk would get what was coming to him, but before that would happen, he would still make protecting and living in Hell's Kitchen a living hell for Matt Murdock. Number 5. No more mutants. Wanda is kind of the queen of shocking moments. Her magic is often unpredictable, resulting in many twists and turns to come about in the comics. But aside from its unpredictability, it's also very powerful, meaning that when Wanda does manage to get her magic right, it still usually gives us very shocking results. That was the case when Wanda had a psychotic break and created an alternate reality which began to crack and crumble as those supers within it began to see it for what it was, a fake reality, created and shaped by Wanda herself, a sham. Frustrated with her father Magneto's obsession to fight for mutant kind, she then altered reality once more as everyone seemed to be coming for her, speaking the words, "No more mutants" in the House of M series. This day, November 2nd, would become known as M-Day in the Marvel Universe, the day when millions of mutants lost their powers. And we still see the consequences for many characters involved in the comics, even today, almost 15 years later. Pretty crazy considering how many events get retconned out of existence almost. Number 4. Carnage becomes a hero? During the events of Axis, everyone had their alignments reversed when Wanda's magic went haywire like it usually does. Chaos magic? Nah, what you gonna do? Carnage as such became a hero, referring to himself as your friendly neighborhood Carnage, and attempting to fight for good like his usual nemesis, Spider-Man. The disturbing thing about his alignment reversal was that it didn't make Cletus Cassidy any less of a murdering psychopath. He still had those urges and had to fight to overcome them. Surprisingly, however, he behaved heroically enough that he was compelled to sacrifice himself in order to save the population of New York when the evil X-Men planted a gene bomb that would kill everyone in the city who wasn't a mutant. Pretty impressive. And he died, and then of course he came back because, well, it's still a comic book. How many times has Carnage lost his legs? That's some trivia for people. Answer me in the comments. How many times? Number 3. Spider-Man reveals his identity. Spider-Man did this as part of the Civil War story arc in order to help motivate other supers to do so and to support his friend and in a way mentor Tony Stark, who at the time was on the side of being for the Superhuman Registration Act, believing being against it would only lead to an all-out war with the government and be worse for supers later on. This was one of the most memorable and shocking moments of that event, outside of, Tony and Cap full on fighting one another and going to all-out war. Spider-Man revealed his secret identity to the world during a press conference, prompting his boss at the Daily Bugle, J.J. Jameson, who had always considered Spider-Man a menace and an enemy, to promptly fire him. His unmasking also gave Iron Man and his supporters the fuel they needed to build concentration camps in the negative zone for non-registered super folks. Yeah. Pretty controversial move there. Spider-Man would eventually get his secret identity back during another shocking and controversial for different reasons story, One More Day. But that's a tale for another list. Maybe a part 4. Number 2. Iron Man is working for Kang. Or really, Iron Man is working for Immortus. During The Crossing, widely regarded as one of the most bizarre storylines from the 90s, it was revealed that Tony had become a villain and sleeper agent for Kang the Conqueror. In another attempt at a shocking twist, it would later be revealed that Kang was actually Immortus and that Immortus was actually Iron Lad, but this wouldn't be revealed until later. And let's be real, none of that was really that shocking to us. I don't think many people cared. Some of the costume redesigns that were part of The Crossing were also equally shocking just in terms of how 90s they were. Just check out Scarlet Witch's costume from this time. Everybody's gotta have trench coats. That's the 90s. Number 1. Magneto, you are not the father. During the events of Axis, we also learned that Wanda and Pietro were not actually the blood relatives of Magneto, and were not even mutants. This all came about when Scarlet Witch attempted to perform some blood magic on her family members. It worked on Pietro, but not on Magnus. Fans would later learn this was because Wanda and Pietro were not actually mutants' children. In fact, they weren't even mutants. The High Evolutionary had experimented on them when they were just babies, and had simply disguised them as mutants and returned them after he was finished with his experimentation. This is still definitely one of my most disliked retcons in comic book history. Since this has been revealed, Scarlet Witch has become even more reviled by the superhero and mutant community, being referred to as a pretender and despised by most mutants. I just feel really bad for Wanda. This woman cannot get a break in the comics. Can we just give Wanda a break? Can Wanda be cool? Could she be cool again?